Well, let's get more now. We can speak to William Alberque, who is former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Weapons of Mass Destruction Non-Proliferation Center. He joins us from Berlin. William, great pleasure having you on the program, as always. Let's just talk, first of all, about those discussions between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump yesterday at the White House. Why do you think Netanyahu took this step of flying over there to talk to the president? What do you think he was trying to persuade him to do?
I think he was probably trying to persuade the United States to maintain maximum pressure and possibly to even go ahead and strike Iran. You'll recall that before the June strikes that Israel started in Iran, there had been some interesting negotiations between the US and Iran and Oman that looked like they were really making progress towards some kind of deal. And it looked like Netanyahu used the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors decision in June that Iran was likely, or that they couldn't rule out that Iran was moving towards nuclear weapon to strike, also disrupting the US negotiations. And then that was so successful that then the US continued on with those military strikes. So I think with the fear that Iran and the United States might come to an agreement, Netanyahu would much rather further military action against Iran.
Right. I mean, at the moment, just listening to what the president's been saying and writing on social media, dialogue seems to be the preferred course of action. And yet, at the same time, as you've been saying and others have been telling us, Israeli officials urging him not to trust Iran, not to believe its promises. I mean, do you think a deal will be reached? And do you think it would be advisable for President Trump to try to reach one?
It's so difficult to predict. Iran's negotiating strategy to date has just been an appalling failure. I mean, brinksmanship, delay, and this really doesn't work with Trump. Trump would rather get some kind of rhetorical agreement and then work out the details later. Instead, Iran wants to front load all the details and delay and obfuscate. And it's just been a recipe for disaster so far. So you really can't tell. But on the other hand, striking a couple of nuclear facilities is one thing. Overthrow of the Iranian government or fundamentally destroying all of their nuclear capabilities, that's a much longer military campaign. I'm sure the US would rather avoid that. But with one aircraft carrier in the region, the USS Lincoln, and now Trump threatening to send another aircraft carrier, which would likely be the George H.W. Bush, which right now is in Virginia. It would take around 10, maybe 14 days to get into the region. Plus with the US global reach with its heavy bombers, it's a real threat. And that's, unfortunately, that's the right negotiating strategy, putting Iran under pressure before you go into negotiations. The optics of Israel visiting Washington can't only but help put pressure on Iran to come to some deal. But they have to just stop this obfuscation and delay, and everything takes 3 weeks, and they come to some minor decision. They have to go back to Tehran. That's just not going to work at this point. It doesn't work with Donald Trump. And so there's a real risk of strikes coming up.
Right. So it sounds to me like you think perhaps Iran is, to some extent, playing games here and trying to buy a bit of time.
That's true. I mean, you have to remember, before the strikes, one of the reasons the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors judged that they could no longer prove that Iran wasn't going for a bomb. They had accelerated their enrichment of 60% enriched HEU. And really, anything past 20%, and you are so close to having a bomb. And we're talking about now, at the last measure, 440.9 kilograms. That's enough for more than a dozen nuclear weapons within weeks if they were able to complete enrichment and turn that into a useful nuclear device. So Iran was really playing a dangerous game before the bombing. And now we don't know where the uranium is. Iran has blocked IAEA inspections to be able to locate and account for all the material. So it's a bad situation. And really, I think Iran should just come to a deal, let the details be worked out between two sides, but agree. And that's why I think the president of Iran, I think it was today, said that he would allow some sort of IAEA verification. I think that may be a sign that they're trying to put some concessions on the table. But ultimately, they still have to agree to the venue and the date for talks. I have some hope. And again, watching the US ramp up the pressure, Iran making some concessions as we go into this, maybe they can come to a deal. There really is a deal space if the sides want it.
So what you're saying is that, and what we've been reading is that Iran has got these stockpiles of enriched uranium, and they've got enough of it to build a device. Who knows? I mean, could they have perhaps already built one? In which case, isn't the discussion of how to prevent an Iranian nuclear program slightly futile at this stage?
I don't think they have a viable device. If they had, the problem is if they actually crossed that threshold and built one nuclear weapon, their window of vulnerability is massive because they would have to build the weapon in secret. They'd have to find a delivery system. Now they have plenty of missiles that can deliver that, but they have to mount it. And then what are they going to do? Launch one nuclear weapon or threaten to launch one nuclear weapon? That would invite the US, with a lot of global support, by the way, to bomb the heck out of Iranian facilities and destroy any possibility of anything like that happening, and even bring about the specter of regime change. If they cross that threshold, that actually opens up a window of opportunity. If they were really going to proliferate, if they were really going to build nuclear weapons, they would need time and space to be able to build a number of them so that they could declare that they had a viable arsenal. So I do honestly think that there is some negotiation to be had here. But again, Iran has the capability, they have the knowledge. They're still building additional facilities to be able to hide these things. And so they would have to declare a level of transparency and openness to inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency, assurances to the United States, and stop this approach of trying to get away with everything they can get away with in order for what they thought was leverage, but actually is vulnerability. I do think there's a deal space, but it's going to have to be under strict international safeguards from now on, with no more obfuscation, no more games. Ironically, it's going back to something like the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran deal, only stronger with more verification, probably without time limitations like that agreement had. And ultimately, I think the Gulf states have to be comfortable with any deal because, as you know, Iran has been disrupting the region, funding separatist movements, funding terrorism, giving missiles to separatist groups. A lot of that also has to be addressed. Because in the long term, you're going to need a regional security stability arrangement that gives Iran some assurance that they won't be overthrown, at the same time prevents them from doing all the damage and killing all the people that they've killed in the Middle East. It's very complex negotiation, but for now, let's see if we can get a nuclear deal done with real verification and transparency, with real limits that Iran honors, and go from there. Otherwise, it's going to be strikes and it's going to be uncertainty, and we'll see, what kind of turmoil that unleashes.
Yeah, and if it is strikes and uncertainty, I mean, one of the uncertainties, just listening to what you're saying as well, that occurs to me is those enriched uranium stockpiles. I mean, is it dangerous? Are there hazards attacking a country that has stockpiles like this? And then as an extension of that question, trying to seek regime change in a country where there are these stockpiles, I mean, isn't there a terrible danger here that those stockpiles end up in the wrong hands?
So, yes, I mean, there is a danger. What we're talking about is enriched uranium hexafluoride gas that then has to be turned into salts and then into metal and then into a sphere that you put in the center of a bomb that you can detonate. There's a couple of technical steps that I think Iran understands the technical challenge to, and they can overcome. But if you were to, we suspect that the actual containers with this enriched uranium may be buried under rubble. Some of them, according to IAEA reports, may have been moved off-site to another location. As to whether they're also buried at that site, we just don't know. So the location of that material is a number one concern. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has demanded that Iran fulfill its safeguards obligations, its treaty obligations, and tell the IAEA where this material is, and they've refused to do so. So the first threat is that this material itself could now be vulnerable to theft, or as you point out, if US strikes occur, that it could be destroyed. Now, there is no threat except in the immediate area of the actual uranium storage containers of breathing it in, but it's not going to cause some Chernobyl-like event. It's not going to explode and cause a nuclear fission. That's not to be feared. But yeah, if you're in the room when one of these things explodes, you're going to have a bad day. You're probably not going to live through that. But if you're 10 miles away, if you're 5 miles away, you're going to be okay. So the U.S. may prioritize destroying any containers with this uranium. It would be much better if Iran just declared them. As to your rate, I mean, if Iran does cross the nuclear threshold and has a number of actual nuclear weapons, then that's a huge danger, because what are they going to do with those nuclear weapons? They could use them for terrorism. They could proliferate them to other states, et cetera. That's why we don't want them to cross that threshold. And quite frankly, I would much rather they were disarmed from this material now. The longer term problem is that they've already gone through the intellectual exercise. They've developed the capabilities and expertise and technologies. So without real safeguards in the future, they could do this again. They could negotiate away what they've already enriched and then just wait and then build secret facilities, which we know that they've constructed additional ones that have not been bombed, and move material and technologies in there and do this again. And that's why you're going to need, like I said, really, really strict safeguards and verification to prevent them from doing this again. And what will Iran ask for in return for that? Openness, trade, reintegration into the global economy, and that's going to require them behaving on a regional basis. So that's why, again, this is a really complex situation. But I wouldn't be afraid of a nuclear release occurring now. I don't think there's any threat of a major, nuclear radiation incident unless the U.S. decides to strike one of Iran's nuclear power reactors. But I don't think we'll do that. I think if there are strikes, they're going to concentrate on leadership, on air defenses, on missile capabilities, and possibly going after where we think this nuclear material might be stored.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you very much for sharing that with us, William Alberque. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.